Hello, good morning, good afternoon, depending where you're based. My name is Claudia, and I'm with the Marcus Evans Group. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar on mitigating uncertainty, a roadmap to the current clinical trial environment, brought to you in partnership with SanaClis. Before I begin, I just want to walk you through a few housekeeping items. As you can see at the bottom of your screen, and multiple applications you can use. Starting from the left-hand side to the right-hand side, you can have access to the media player, which is currently being highlighted. That's what we're going to be, you're going to be able to see our panelists today, our webcams. Followed by that, then you have the slide deck. We don't have too many slides. In fact, we only have 2 slides, but that's where you're going to see all the slides coming through. And then if you have any questions during the webinar, we encourage you to submit them through the Q&A widget, which is currently being highlighted to you as well. All the questions will be answered right then during the Q&A session. So again, do feel free to send out any questions during the discussions, and we'll make sure that we will answer them. If any questions gets unanswered, do not worry at all. Someone from the SanaClis team will get back in touch with you and answer that question either via email or telephone, whatever way you prefer. So there's a help widget available to you, just in case that you're facing any issue watching this event today. Again, if you have any echo or there is any issue on your Wi-Fi, you lose connection, do not worry at all. The session is being recorded. So we will make sure that you have that recording to our sports event today. Finally, but not least, we have the speakers file, which is available to you. Again, we encourage you to connect with the speakers, using the LinkedIn profile. You can connect with them. You also have email addresses in case you want to connect with them later on today. And a survey, which is also available to you, currently in the center of the screen. Please do answer that survey. It's very 3 simple questions. We just want to understand what type of content you want to hear from us next. So it's very important that we tailor-made that to you and your needs. So if you can quickly answer those 3 questions, that will be very much appreciated. With that said, and not any other delays or logistics kind of things on my end, I wanted to bring to the floor the 3 amazing speakers we have today. So I'm going to allow each of them to introduce themselves. Starting with yourself, Dr. Nermint, would you like to please introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. So hello, everyone. I'm Nameen Varawala, and I'm thrilled to be participating in this webinar. And you find me in my home office in London in the UK. I'm a physician by training and have spent the past 20 years in clinical development, working both in the CRO sector, notably at a long stint at PRA Health Sciences, who purchased and acquired a niche CRO that I'd set up. And after that phase, I spent the past 10 years working as head of clinical development for pharmaceutical and medical device companies. Presently, I'm head of clinical at Atlantic Healthcare, and the past year through the pandemic has been a challenging time, as it has stretched all my experience and expertise of clinical development, as we've had to address the unprecedented challenges this time has imposed on us. And I greatly look forward to discussing that with you all this afternoon.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Dr. Yuri, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yes. Hi. Thanks, Claudia. My name is Yuri Martina. I'm a physician by training, and I have a PhD in genetics and molecular biology. I've been in clinical development in different roles and actually across different companies and across different countries and continents for about more than 18 years in the meantime. I'm looking forward to speaking with Nermeen and Roman about the challenges of the last year, which of course have been also, in my case, my home office from Aachen and several others when it comes to executing clinical trials and also thinking about clinical development. So looking forward to talking about this with the other 2 speakers today.
Thank you so much. And then we also have Roman. Please, would you mind introducing yourself?
Thank you, Claudia. Hello, I'm Roman Grinchuk, Chief Operating Officer at SanaClis. I have pharmaceutical background and working in this area for around 15 years, 10 of which I spent in CRO industry, being on various roles in clinical operations as well as in CRO management. At SanaClis, I'm responsible for overseeing of our operational units, including clinical operations, data management, pharmacovigilance, medical writing, as well as clinical trial supply chain and sourcing. I'm directing company operations and their activities to conduct studies according to applicable regulations.
I think we lost sound on Roman. So while I get him back on, Laura, I mean, feel free to take the floor, kind of a quick introduce yourself, and then if you want to start with the panel, I will sort out with Roman in a minute. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Claudia. My name is Laura. I'm a content producer here at Marcus Evans, and I look forward to moderating today's discussion. You find me in my home office here in Cyprus, where it's currently 30 degrees and the sun is shining. So, going straight to our first question today, how has the pandemic changed clinical trial conduct? Narmeen, why don't we start with you?
Thank you for that. From my perspective, the two big changes have been we've been forced, and actually very effectively, have dealt with the business of clinical operations, be it design, be it recruitment, be it conduct, be it data management, without having the need to be physically present. So we've taken travel out of the equation and have started using the tools we've had to be able to conduct these clinical trials without a physical presence. So that's been one big feature. And that has forced us to learn how to be more effective, more efficient, and better use the technology tools we have. The other factor, the other big impact that I've experienced, and I think many of my colleagues have, is that it's forced us to truly be innovative, creative, and resilient. We've all had to stop in our tracks, reassess the situation, and according to what has been best for our various projects, address and create a new solution. So it's been, and from that perspective, I think as an industry, we deserve a bit of a pat on our backs in that we've not allowed ourselves to grind to a halt. And after a momentary stop, we've actually all picked ourselves up and begun to re-engage and re-embrace with our projects, given the existing circumstances.
Yuri, how about yourself?
Yeah, I think in principle I agree with Nermin. We have accelerated certain transformations that 1 year ago were not probably deemed possible. Thinking about making the teams more remote, which is something that, for example, on the CRO side has already happened years ago, but on the pharma side has been a little bit more conservative in that respect. We have definitely thought about new ways of recruiting, new ways also of executing the clinical trial. I think one point I'm missing is probably we have not yet evolved our protocols and our design to cope with that. We do still require, in some cases, heavy assessments which are difficult to do remotely. And that's something I think as we move forward that definitely we will have even more focus on. The other point probably is that the pandemic has affected different regions and different countries in different ways, as well as different therapeutic areas in a different manner. So that clearly have also created probably different ways of coping with that. While some solutions have been generalized, like work from home, as I see also from the colleagues here on the panel.
Roman, anything to add?
Yeah, apologize first of all for internet connection. Yeah, basically COVID implied on many changes in the way how do we organize and conduct clinical trials, and basically it challenged us a lot and challenged typical ways on how do we set up and organize clinical trial and how do we manage them, and pushed us to identify a nimble approach on how to proceed or how to continue it in quite a new environment. For us, key takeaway or lesson learned was that COVID eventually showed us that there is a possibility to set up clinical studies in weeks rather than months or even years in some cases. And it pushed us to streamline many operations, contracting, budgeting, in some cases RAMEC approvals were expedited to much extent, and basically changed the way and changed how and showed us how important is teamwork, how important is sponsor and CRO teamwork and reaction time to quite typical questions, and how the study can benefit from it. Thank you.
Perhaps I could just add, if I may, could I add just a couple of, I think, really major changes, which the impact of which will really affect us maybe as we get this pandemic truly in our rear view mirror. One we have to remember that we've been given the COVID treatments and the approval of the vaccines, our expectations of a regulatory agency have really changed. And it'll be really interesting to see whether our regulators can keep up with this pace of fast approval, interaction with sponsors they have done for COVID treatments and vaccines. The other thing I'll say, which is particularly relevant for smaller companies like Atlantic, is that the investor appetite for investing in healthcare and clinical trials has increased. This pandemic has put a spotlight on how important the biotech sector is and the importance of supporting companies through their clinical development. And finally, the third thing is that, as we all know, clinical trials, results, data is something that's percolated into the general public, thanks to the overall interest we've had in new treatments, vaccine approvals, etc. And how that will impact going forward general clinical trial participation will be really interesting to see.
So I hear that there were a lot of challenges for both pharma and biotech and CROs, and the industry has shown a lot of resilience, which is indeed fantastic. However, all these changes, do you think that they're long-lasting, and which aspects will be here to stay, and how much do you think things will be going back to normal eventually?
Maybe Yuri would like to kick off.
Yeah, I can respond. Sure. I think some changes are going to stay. Example, the probably a more flexible balance between remote working or even having remote contacts with the key opinion leaders and so on, and with our sites, and rather than going face to face. I think some other aspects, and probably this is more of a hope as well personally, in terms of human interactions, will fade away and will get back to normality in terms of coffee time or the coffee around, or the time around the coffee machine or the water machine. I think it's still key, particularly in general in the industry, but also other industries in terms of developing certain ideas. But I think some of the changes will remain. There will be more flexibility. There will be definitely different expectations. Not sure if we will really manage to have different expectations on the authorities, for example, on approvals. But there will be different ways of working moving forward, definitely.
I would like that, yes, indeed, we would love to see that level of attention and response from regulatory authorities going forward, but this is unlikely to stay. But some changes will stay, and as Yuri said, digitalization, virtual meetings, it will continue. It was growing fast or developing before COVID, but COVID rapidly enhanced development of various types of virtual technologies that facilitate either remote work or oversight under this work.
Well, going back to the technology, because I hear a lot about technology, what is the best use of technology in communication during the last 1 year? And I'll give you an example. Email may not be an appropriate tool for brainstorming discussion. On the other hand, when you're dealing with global teams in remote locations, people who are not fluent in English may prefer an email message to a phone call. So can you tell me a little bit about the whole communication process with global teams over the last year? Narmeen, how about yourself?
Maybe I could kick off. And although it's a question related to technology, my response is more related to behavior. So the most remarkable, the most remarkable thing has been that we have all become far more responsive. And to a large extent, is that because as a community or as a sector, we're not spending so much time in an aeroplane. So because of less travel, there is whether it's your key opinion leaders, it's your project managers, it's your clinical trial staff, everyone is far more reactive using multiple tools according to the task at hand. And as a result, projects have been moving perhaps at a faster rate than we would have otherwise expected. Directly with respect to technology, I think the other really interesting thing is, and this webinar is a great example, is that now we have multiple technologies and we all have got used to using these multiple technologies in various combinations. And I'm sure we've all noticed that these technologies have actually got better. So the quality of a Zoom conversation, for example, is much better now than it was 12 months ago.
Couldn't agree more. Roman, anything to add?
Just to acknowledge that indeed the number of teleconferences raised up dramatically, but on the other hand, we saved a lot on travels, and this time can be used for good.
Going back to the question of flexibility, and here is a question for the panel. How much flexibility do you allow during a study launch during COVID? And can you compare that flexibility as opposed to a study launch in 2019, for example?
Basically, Yuri? I would say that.
Yeah, I wouldn't know how to make a full comparison. And then Roman, please feel free. You probably have different experience based on interaction with many of us, rather than having one only source in that respect. I wouldn't really see a difference, Laura. In terms of the flexibility that we gave, I think that's more probably sponsor specific or sponsor plus vendor specific rather than COVID or post-COVID. I think what we have shown, and Nermeen has mentioned that at the very beginning, is real resilience. There were cases where teams have to be extremely resilient in getting through certain hurdles in some regions, regardless of national lockdowns or local lockdowns or supposed less or more availability, for example, of ICU beds, and particularly when it comes to probably some specific trials that might need this support. But Roman, maybe you have more experience given the broader range of interactions.
Yeah, I would agree with you that it's, to a certain extent, it's sponsor specific, but I would like to say that certain level of flexibility is needed anyway, with COVID or without. But when COVID started, we saw gradual responses from different European countries to challenges that occurred. In some way, we had many sites either closed due to COVID or switched as COVID units or reorganized. And this required us to identify and implement meaningful and quick solutions on how to manage our sites, patients enrolled there. And that flexibility eventually required us, as well as quick reaction time from sponsor and CRO team. To add, flexibility was, by the way, quite well endorsed by regulatory authorities, both EMA and FDA, as well as various country regulatory authorities published special guidances on how to conduct clinical trials during pandemic. And another point here to consider, that to have this flexibility during the study, there should be probably an investment made at study start to identify all what-if scenarios here and establishing risk response strategies or risk mitigation strategies, to have a pool of pre-defined tools. How do we respond on every occurred risk?
And
Maybe
when we speak about,
I was just going to say that in terms of flexibility, maybe let's just talk a little bit about resource allocation. So the projects where that was effectively done were able to be even more resilient. And what I mean is that there was a time when with the lockdowns and the uncertainty of the pandemic, that there was a need to reallocate resources, let's say from your travel budget to more facilities at the site to go through the COVID protocols. If you were able to do that, more investment perhaps in technology, that allowed the study starter process to be less disrupted than it otherwise might have been.
Absolutely. And when we speak about flexibility, going to the other end of the spectrum, micromanagement. Here's a tricky question. How do you strike the right balance between accountability and oversight without micromanagement? So in other words, to enable the sponsor the visibility to be sure that activities are progressing in line with the expectations, while at the same time, the CRO team should have the freedom to act without any barriers or any hurdles that are being put in their path.
And maybe I could kick off here by saying that ultimately, and this is something we've not yet touched on, but I think is really important, is the question of trust. And in this pandemic setting, we've been forced to be more trusting of either our employees, because we're no longer in the same physical space. And if we are doing that for our employees, we can no longer travel. So we have to be more trusting of operations at the site. And of course, far more trusting of our vendor. Even the need, it has not been possible to have in-person meetings, to travel the way we used to. And those relationships where this trust has been quickly built have been able to overcome the issue of management and of micromanagement and working together, and build a most effective working relationship and truly a partnership. As you know, for decades as an industry, that's what we've always sought, a true partnership between the sponsor and the vendor. And the environment has forced us to build that trust, and those who've been able to do it have been able to progress this concept of a great working partnership.
Roman, how about from a CRO perspective?
Definitely agree with Narmin, and this style of micromanagement is very clearly correlates with trust the sponsor has into CRO, and even the sponsor that has micromanagement style Once the relationship between sponsor and CRO develops, the level of trust goes up, then the level of micromanagement goes down with it. Yuri, you wanted to comment on this?
Yeah, I fully agree with that, and I think looking at both sides, it's definitely a relationship that needs to be built with the time, and you will start probably with a higher level of oversight, and then move towards a freer oversight as the relationship with the vendor evolves, and hopefully you go through learning each other ways of working, or even establishing a common way of working and kind of building a partnership. And to your original question, Laura, I don't think there is a unique balance. I think it will depend from a series of factors which span from the sponsor, the vendor, the specificity of the program, and different other aspects. So it's always difficult to say there is one size that fits all. Probably it's a balance that even the same sponsor redesigns for each program and each different vendor, unless, as I say, they build a long-standing relationship with one partner where, of course, there is more of an evolution.
Absolutely. Well, let me ask you this then. How do you identify an issue with performance? And do you act immediately? Who do you communicate with? What is the process there?
Yeah, we usually try to actually prevent issues with performance. So we do use a oversight model which is based on the E8 and the E6 guidelines, the recent revisions. That's not always possible. Usually when that happens, of course, we raise eventually also a quality issue and we try to intervene. I mean, issues will occur sometimes due to performance, sometimes due to human error, because there is always a human even behind the Zoom TC or the Teams TC. Ultimately, I think what is key is to identify those at an early stage, and rather than not making errors, you can try to minimize the errors that you make, of course, by proper design. But what it really improves the longer term quality is actually to develop systems that prevent those issues. And most of the times I didn't really observe performance issues. I more observed human errors due to complicated processes or stuff like that. And that's something you can build with the time together with the vendor in order to prevent that.
And maybe I could just build on those excellent comments by saying that in my extensive experience I've had with clinical development, I've been lucky in that, and I don't think it's just me, that there have been relatively few issues with performance. In fact, I'm struggling to think of having had a colleague where there was truly a performance issue. We are lucky. We attract some terrific talent in our industry, and everyone is focused and wants to do their best. The reason why we have issues with let's call them our milestones or our various metrics is to do with the complexity of what we're trying to do. And hence the way to manage that, exactly as Yuri says, is oversight, decision-making, issue escalation. And doing that in a trusting environment is the most effective way of taking care of these so-called performance issues. And my own sense is that the pandemic has forced us to be more, again, part of this resilience. But we've all been in this together and have been forced to work as a team to overcome this. And I'm really hoping that those lessons will take with us forward.
Roman, any comment on issues with performance? Identifying them, dealing with them?
So completely agree that the important is to work on the prevention of those, but sometimes they okay. Yeah? There are small issues, there are bigger issues, and it's also important to use to have proper oversight process. Internally, we are using both milestones, we're using KPIs, we're using spot checks. If we see anything wrong, we start digging it. And important here is to address when there is a potential issue identified, it's important to address it to right recipient or stakeholder and to establish satisfactory corrective and preventive action, CAPA.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Again,
well,
returning to COVID times, many milestones, especially recruitment milestones, were not achieved in oncology studies, pulmonology indications, many other, especially when the indication was not life-threatening. And this is the issue for the study. And in that case, it was, we need to take that. And we were sitting together with the sponsors and looking for the best scenario to move forward and how can we deal with it.
And actually, speaking of enrollment, here is a question that came from the audience. What are the advances in enrollment modeling for forecast of patient recruitment timelines?
Sorry, Laura, I lost the beginning because of internet connection.
No problem. These are the challenges from working from home these days. What are the advances in enrollment modeling for forecast of patient recruitment timelines? I see Yuri smiling, so maybe he wants to jump on this one.
No, I will let Roman answer. Usually we are fully outsourced, so we usually will ask, please give us your best forecast on enrollment. I think I was smiling because there are a few nuances to that question, and it depends how far you want to go. I've heard colleagues who are using advanced algorithms or machine learning, and colleagues that are doing that still in a fairly standard or fashioned manner. There are advantages and disadvantages on both sides. My personal experience in the last 18 years has been that rarely I've seen a good forecasting based on previous performance, which also that what comes out of modeling usually when you use machine learning. What I've seen is a certain consistency by certain sites versus others, particularly when you come to specific indications, not generalized across indications. And what I've experienced is that what really can make an edge and a difference is actually the relationship that together with your vendor you can establish with the different recruiting sites, regardless of what was the original forecast. Because the physicians at the site have anyhow the let's say habit of telling no problem, we will do 100 patients. Reality is usually 2 or 3, but the original. So it's a little bit of a tricky question, and it depends which direction you want to go.
It's definitely tricky, especially now, and indeed comparing to historical data, what was before COVID and what to expect now. This data does not correlate at all. Basically, what we typically use to establish recruitment pace is various scenarios, including our performance in the past studies. It's a review of similar studies with data available in as open data in clinicaltrial.gov, UDRAST portals and country portals as well. We have specialized databases. Now we also basically we proactively reaching out again and talking to sites to see how are they impacted, what is their expect. And if they see such patients at all, for some indication, they simply do not see patients in their routine practice. So all past experience is basically will not work. So probably key here is communication. Of course, investigators sometimes tend to overestimate, and again, its adjustments has to be made based on it.
Nermeen, anything to add here?
So
maybe one. Sorry, Nermeen, go ahead. Sorry.
Please go ahead. No, you go ahead. Please go ahead.
Maybe one point to add to Roman is what usually works well in that respect of, let's say, adjusting for the overestimation of the physicians or the investigators is usually to have some thorough work in terms of medical records review at the site where this is possible, and of course, according to not necessarily disclosing or looking into data, but looking more into the trends of the type of patients that the sites really, or the pool of patients that the sites really is able to foresee, and going through the inclusion-exclusion criteria very thoroughly, which is more than usually a questionnaire, and that's why I was mentioning how important is the relationship with the investigators in that respect. Because if you do that in a knowledgeable and systematic way, then you can really scheme what is the real potential, recruitment potential. But completely agree. Sorry, I interrupted you, and I didn't mean to do so.
No, this is really interesting discussion. And of course, in many ways, the holy grail of clinical development is recruiting the right patients on time. So the perspective I'll bring is at the present time, I am in the process of designing for Atlantic a program of clinical trials in inflammatory bowel disease, which is a highly competitive clinical trial landscape, and also trials in rare disease. So it's quite interesting to see the tools available, the expertise available in these two different scenarios. And if based on that, maybe the comments or the experiences I would share, one is that the data that's available is more than before. So it is now possible through various data sets and databases and tools to drill down on clinical trial performance, payer data, patient usage data. So that capability exists more, and that's growing. And there are the large CROs who offer that as a differentiator. However, as we've all heard, and we all know that if you were to rely on only that, then you are unlikely to be successful. And the trick is to combine that with our old-fashioned tried and tested techniques, which is all about feasibility, protocol design. It is, but the interesting opportunity is to be able to use both and be able to find ways of, in a pragmatic way, accessing these large data sets that are now available.
Definitely. And basically the data sets, they are built using pre-COVID data on patient visits, on number of patients diagnosed per capita and so on. And basically, yes, we need to go back to old school model to pick up the phone and basically call and talk to doctors. Completely agree.
And here is a bit of a tricky question for everyone. Can you elaborate on effective techniques to seamlessly transition from one CRO to another?
The simplest answer is to make sure you're never in that situation.
I would fully agree. My answer would be the best tool is avoid it. I agree with Nermin. I wouldn't go into that situation. I wouldn't go into that situation even if I have and I experienced in real life some serious issues with quality on even some major CROs. But I wouldn't transition from one CRO to the other. One way around that, which worked fairly well in saving a program which was on the edge of desperation or being lost, I think it was bringing in-house through contractors most of the work. But in general, I would absolutely avoid transitioning between two CROs. It's calling for disaster, to be honest.
But it's a very important question, and let me address it a little, give you a fuller answer. So we all know that never forget that the commonest reason for CRO change is your CRO is acquired or merged by another CRO. So it kind of happens to you, and we've all been there, and we have to kind of deal with it. So that's one. And then the other. So from drawing on my personal experience, I have maybe to leave modesty aside. One of the most valuable things I've done is insisting that we don't change CRO, but work better with the existing CRO. But having said that, I've also been in a situation where, wearing my CRO hat, I was the rescue CRO and had to step in and make that work. And if there are, from all these experiences, if there are sort of the lessons to take forward, is to ultimately a recognition that individuals, either as sponsors, the clinical trial professionals, we are actually all very similar. And you have to then be able to work at that individual level and build communication relationships at that individual level, and that is the best way of dealing with it. And if you're able to do that, then the chances, the disruption will be minimized.
When you were calling when you were calling as the rescue CRO, was that a replacement or an add-on?
It was an add-on, and this is now a little while ago. But I used to run a CRO that focused on doing clinical trials in India at a time when India was considered a very exciting place to do for patient recruitment. And we were brought in as a rescue CRO to take care of a particular piece. And again, as you can imagine, there were lots of very valuable learnings, but the being effective was being able to work as, if you like, as the junior CRO partner in a clinical trial program, being very aware of all the relationships that had to be maintained. And in keeping in mind that ultimately it's all about delivering what the project needs, and that kind of overcomes the requirements of the individual parties. Easier said than done, but we tried very hard to do that.
Absolutely, and it's actually very helpful when we have someone that has sort of a foot in each camp experience, like you, Nermin, so you can see both sides and provide examples. And well, going back to what you just said, sorry, go ahead. So you want to add something?
No, I was just going to say, Laura, that the other thing I just throw in, and again, I'm raising a flag for us all clinical research professionals, that there are many professionals like me who have experience of both. So there is lots of movement between CRO and sponsor, and that, of course, also improves working relationships and the partnership between these two key players in clinical development.
Absolutely. So, should you then focus on delivering rather than expectations?
We should focus on delivery within the expectations, I would say.
Right.
Basically, key here is, is that each party is aware about what the expectation of another party are. If goals and targets and deliverables and specification, whatever we call the specification, is defined, then basically the delivery can be done accordingly. This is key probably.
So I've been in situations where the mantra has been under promise, over deliver. And then I've also been in situations where the thinking has been, you aim for the moon and you'll fall in the stars. So so it's a question of finding the balance between both. And I think too often we are at risk of wanting to be safe, therefore not being ambitious enough. And the best way, of course, the holy grail is to be as realistic as you possibly can and as accurate as you can. And that's when all the tools we've been earlier talking about, particularly in terms of patient recruitment, issue escalation, all those things can allow you to be far more realistic and accurate with respect to delivery without unnecessarily being not ambitious enough or not stretching yourself enough.
Yuri,
I can confirm and agree with. Yeah, I can confirm and agree with the colleagues. I mean, I've been to the point you were raising before. I've been on the CRO side where there was the mantra, let's say, under promise and over deliver. And of course, when you are on the sponsor side, it's a little bit different music. But on the other side is a music that sometimes you play towards senior management because expectations might be different. I think what is really key is to be realistic, but still very ambitious. I tend to become very irritated when I see teams building a lot of buffer. And which I understand the purpose for, but then that automatically makes you target for a less result, and it sets you up for a non-ambitious goal. On the other side, there needs to be some flexibility and some planning in terms of contingency. Because when you, of course, are ambitious, not necessarily everything goes into the right direction sometimes. And one example is there are countries where you always get a deficiency letter. Doesn't matter how good your submission is or how well thought your submission is. And it depends sometimes on just the assessor. So a little bit, Nermin summarized it very well. It's to find a compromise, the right compromise, and then also to explaining the rationale and leaving open the door to improve and meet that ambitious goal, but at the same time not being disappointed if actually your ambitious goal, which was probably a stretch goal, does not become necessarily all the time reality.
And maybe, Laura, just a final thing I'll throw in is that we are privileged to be able to be working on medicines that could take care of unmet clinical and patient need. That should be the driver. There are patients there who are waiting for the medicines we're working on.
Absolutely. This should be the ultimate driver. I couldn't agree more. So based on what you just said, it sounds like communication, obviously, and transparency is very, very important in communication. Can you share examples of how to best ensure there is transparency in all this communication and data in order for the key parties to make critical decisions? Roman?
I think
I would revert probably back with what Yuri and Nermin said about underestimate and overperform, and how it's correlated with transparency in communication, especially at the bidding stage. Probably both CROs and investigators tend to overestimate their capabilities because underestimation may not feel good enough in comparison with other CRO proposals for the study. Either we speak on study timelines, enrollment pace, and other indicators. So it's again correlates with trust the sponsor has in CRO if the assumptions are correct and well-grounded. And basically here the task for us, for example, when we bid, is to show the sponsor why we are assuming specifically this recruitment rate, or why do we foresee such timelines. As Yuri said, there are countries, and many of them, where you cannot get approval without deficiency letter. And this always impacts on the timelines. So all communication has to be key, probably criteria are honest and transparent. And this builds the trust, this builds proper relationship between two parties and the best way to move forward. Nermin?
With respect to data, let me give you another perspective. That after all, remember, our clinical trial, the whole clinical project is all about collecting clinical data. And now, happily, we're well established in terms with our EDC systems and databases and data sets that all participants in the trial have access to that data. And where we should all be going to is looking at that hard clinical data. And these could be all sorts of things like an issue with a particular eligibility criteria, or very, very importantly, an early signal with adverse event or safety. All that is now should be shared by all concerned with many watchful eyes on it, and not just look at it, but then be able to understand and read it, pick up trends, and then act on it. That is the real value of the access to the data that technology now gives us. And again, as we've all been saying, that a trusting partnership should be very comfortable with all clinical trial, with all project members, be they sponsor or CRO, working and looking at that data as we're collecting it.
Yuri?
Yeah, I'm nothing to add to what my colleagues said. I think it sums it up very well. And yes, definitely today you have the opportunity clearly to make also very clear data-driven decisions based on those data. And most of the time you have access almost in real life, which really makes a difference. And moreover, and more importantly, you have the opportunity to really mine those data, which before would require a lot of manpower, and it's not needed any longer.
One final question, because we're just about out of time. This could be another tricky one. When the sponsors lack regulatory data and supply chain management knowledge in a specific region, seeing as most of you are running global trials, what role does the CRO play there, and how much do you rely on them to provide that?
So I would say...
Go, Nermin.
No, let me just say that the role of the CRO partner is absolutely critical. And if you're going to an unknown or no sponsor by definition can have experience of truly global clinical trial conduct. And if that's the trial you want to conduct, of course, you have to depend on the CRO. And here, wearing my CRO hat, I have been I believe I've been a very valuable partner in a number of clinical trial projects, bringing my India country expertise, regulatory, supply chain, site, healthcare practices, relationships with investigators. The list goes on. And sponsors recognize that, and CROs recognize that. So I think we've got to a stage where our global clinical trials experience collectively as an industry has allowed us to appreciate that and look for it and applaud it when we find it.
Fully agree, and I think in that respect we need to think about the CRO or the vendor in general as an extension of what you have in terms of experience. And again, it can be in terms of region, but it can also be in terms of therapeutic area, in terms of certain specific aspects where you might have some knowledge, but you might need specific in-depth knowledge. And I think the only way for everyone to operate would be to think that way. I tend to doubt who says she or he knows it all, because that would not be humanly possible. So it's good to have actually and to use that expertise, and that's why we leverage on vendors as well. Huh?
Absolutely. Roman, maybe as a CRO, you can provide an example.
Hard to identify a specific example, but I would definitely agree that basically the scope of our work is to add capabilities there in the areas the sponsor may lack. And either we speak about regulatory or supply chain or geographical coverage or therapeutical knowledge. This is basically this puzzle where it makes up to the full picture.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I'm afraid that we have run out of time, but we have had a very fruitful discussion. I've certainly learned a lot. I'm sure that the attendees have learned a lot as well. Thank you so much for your time. And I'm going to pass it on to my colleague, Claudia, just for some final housekeeping remarks.
Yeah, so thank you so much. Just kind of echo what Laura just said. It has been a great panel discussion. I'm sure that the audience have walked away today with a lot of new tips. So yeah, so thank you guys for such a great insights. To the audience, just a quick reminder that there is a survey there for you to answer if you haven't had a chance to do so, or perhaps you join a little bit later today. And of course, we will be sending you a reminder that the event is recorded. And if you want to catch up later on because you have to pop out, do no worries at all. That's available to you as well. Once again, on behalf of all panelists, SanaClis, Marcus Evans Online Event, we would like to thank you all, and I'll be catching up very soon. Thank you so much, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.